So why is this time stuff so hard in the first place? And spoiler alert, it has something to do with the patriarchy. And this is one of my I would say one of my biggest revelations in the last 2 or 3 years about this. So I did a little, I think one or two of you were here for the quarterly planning session in fall. And for that session, I did a little research on where do we get some of this stuff in the first place? Like historically, the phrase we use, the Protestant work ethic, where does that come from? Turns out it's from this guy named Max Weber, who was a German sociologist. Max Weber said, was kind of outlined this notion of Protestant work ethic and he actually made the assertion that capitalism was invented by Protestants. There's debate about this, FYI. Not people, scholars don't necessarily believe this, but it does look very unsettling for those of us who identify as Christians that either Catholics or Protestants or both did come up with the idea of capitalism. So part of the intention here, at least among Protestants, when the Protestant Reformation happened, going back a little farther, was the idea that all work is honored. So there was this sense of calling or higher vocation for people who were pastors or in helping professions of some kind or another. Like there was this sense that they had this sense of calling. The assertion here is that all work was honored regardless of what it was, that all of that can be something that comes out of a sense of higher purpose. So that's not entirely bad. The problem is that it got used and still gets used very, very often as, oh, there's nobility in your work and we're going to take advantage of it by, oh, if your work is noble, we're not really going to pay you for it. You're doing it out of a sense of calling or duty. So we don't need to appropriately compensate you. We don't need to treat you well. We don't need to provide you with support when your body gets injured by the work that you do, things like that. So it is, and of course, it also got used to justify things like slavery at its worst. So that kind of thought played into that. It's not the only place. There's people who know about this history better than I do. So I'm giving you the very Wikipedia version of this, by the way. So, and also in my anti-racism reading, which I've done a reading and study a lot of in the last few years, an author named Tima Oken, I think, who does or did anti-racism training, particularly for workplaces, although at least in my reading of it, you can extrapolate it for other things. There's these habits of white supremacy, which on their surface might not sound bad if you're thinking of them you think of them like, okay, perfectionism, like we're just trying to do work really well, you could say, right? That's really, well, except that as we know, perfect is loaded, right? Culturally, that certain kinds of people have an ideal form. There's a color skin that's better than others. There's a gender that's better than others. And on, particular kinds of learning styles are favored over others. Anyway, the list goes on and on. Individualism, of course, there's, it's me, it's all about me kind of stuff. I'm the only one who could possibly do this. And I'm sure we have all played that tape in our head at one time or another, right? Oh, well, I'm the only one who can do this, so I must do it for whatever reason or another. Progress is always better or more. This is what I was referring to when we even start enumerating, like, oh, we must have a million more things to take care of myself on the list. Like even that somehow, like we have to do. Progress is always defined as better or more, which isn't necessarily true. But that's definitely a habit of capitalism. So the next one, the one that I want to pause on for the purposes of our conversation today anyway, although I could pause on any of those and those would probably resonate, is quantity over quality. And you might do a little double take there because like the phrase we use in culture is like, we want quality over quantity most of the time, right? They say it the other way. But as it turns out, at least in Tima Oken's paper that she wrote, This is a tool. This understanding of things is a tool of white supremacy and, of course, capitalism, which is intermeshed. So all resources are directed toward producing measurable goals. So numbers, that means generally. I mean, and I'm sure you can think of a lot of examples in your own life and work where these thought processes play in. So things can be measured, so things that can be measured are more valued than things that are harder to measure. Little or no value is attached to process. Only interested in outcomes or things that can be measured. There's a discomfort with feelings or emotions. No, that doesn't happen anywhere, does it? No understanding that when there's conflict between the content, so like an agenda of a meeting, for example, and the process, like people's need to be heard or engaged, process will prevail. In other words, we'll get through the agenda at the expense of people's feelings or need to be heard. Always. We'll always do that. And when I read that, that hurts me because I have done that 4 million times in my life because I love getting through an agenda, friends. So like, again, I'm in this with you. This isn't me being some kind of guru who got it all together. And I'm adding, this isn't on her list initially, but I would say the inability to focus and doing a lot of things without any particular intention behind them. Doing for the sake of doing, being busy for the sake of being busy. This is the water we swim in, the air we breathe. This is our culture, which is gross. Like I said, when I read this, I feel kind of gross about myself, but I also know that now I'm aware of it and I can work with it. So it's actually empowering too. So here's the deal. More is not better, but we think it is. We think that more is better. And so we respond both individually and in groups by always doing more. But what we tend to do is underestimate ourselves in the long term. I mean, a bunch of you were talking about, well, I don't make long range plans. So we underestimate ourselves in terms of our big dreams or the things we want for our lives, but we completely overestimate what we can get done in a day. I'm inviting us to take a step back from this notion that quantity is always better. And that maybe we need to pay a little bit more attention to the quality. And a lot of you mentioned this word when we first got started, the word burnout. I would highly recommend this book if you have not read it already, Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. It's pretty fantastic. So what is burnout specifically when we refer to burnout? And this is from a guy named Herbert Freudenberger. I guess we get a lot of Germans who talk about this stuff. This was in 1975. He coined the term that we now refer to as burnout. Emotional exhaustion. So these are there's three elements, at least how he defines it. Depersonalization. So that means like a loss of empathy, basically. Like an inability to care about, like, I don't have any more energy left to care for other people, to care about other people. And then a decreased sense of accomplishment. That means no matter what I do, nothing will change this. So they go on, what they do that I think is a contribution, like a contribution to the conversation about burnout, is they ask the question, so why? Like, how is this perpetuated? They ask this question. Again, not surprisingly, it's the patriarchy. So they use the phrase human giver syndrome, which was actually coined by Kate Mann in the book Down Girl, The Logic of Misogyny. I have not read that book yet either. This is what human giver syndrome is. And so the pressure is to be happy, or rather pretty happy, calm, and giving, and like always concerned with the needs of others. Those are sort of the key components to what human giver syndrome is. And there is this really intense pressure. And there, again, they name that this is more subtle probably in real life than it is in the terms they're defining it, but they sort of define it pretty starkly along gender lines. Here's the quote. This is the book Essentialism by Greg McKeown. And this is really the essence of the book, although he writes a lot more in it. Essentialism is not about how to get more things done. It's about how to get the right things done. It doesn't mean just doing less for the sake of less either. It's about making the wisest possible investment of your time and energy in order to operate at our highest point of contribution by doing only what is essential. And I have to say, I was thinking about this when I was taking a walk the other day, that even when I think about my own life and boiling things down to what is essential, that feels like underperforming to me. That feels like saying, oh, well, I'm only going to do the bare minimum. And that is absolutely not what they're saying here. But that's the feeling that word essential, even that means like, oh, we don't have time for frills here, so we're going to do it. It feels like a triaging, and that's more neutral, but like we're triaging what we have to get done, right? No, he's actually suggesting that let's actually make really good choices about have the most impact by doing the right kinds of things. The importance of rest, and this is again from the book Burnout. Here's what you need in terms of rest every day, and this is physiology. 42% of your day, or 10 hours of it, needs to be rest. So there's two different kinds of rest there. We have sleep. For most adults, that's between 7 to 9 hours is good for most people. Varies a little bit, so some people can sleep 7 and be completely fine. Other people are like, if I get 8.5, I'm not feeling great. And that varies depending on your body. There's also active rest. So doing some of those things we made in the list earlier, like engaging in doing some of those things that help us to rest. And we'll talk about it a little bit more later.